David and the Dragon by Jane Launchbury. There was a cold north wind blowing as David started the long walk home from school. The little boy shivered and pulled the hood of his coat down over his eyes to keep out the biting cold. He walked faster when he reached the start of the woodland path, partly to keep warm and partly because the light was beginning to fade, and he hated being in the wood when it was dark. He had a very vivid imagination, and in his mind there were horrible monsters lurking behind the creaking old trees, just waiting to pounce on him. Every crack of a breaking twig made him jump and walk a little faster. He did not dare to look over his shoulder. David hurried along the woodland path, glancing nervously into the shadows around him. He was in the thickest part of the wood, near the middle, when he saw an extraordinary thing. Straight ahead of him, through the tangled brambles and briars, he caught a glimpse of sparkling colors and a puff of smoke. In the fading light, he couldn't be sure, but he was convinced that there was a huge, scaly monster lurking in the undergrowth. David stopped in his tracks. He would have to find a different way home. There was no way that he was going anywhere near whatever it was in the bushes. Taking a deep breath and spitting up, David turned down a tiny path made by the woodland animals. He was almost running when he saw the thing again. In fact, he very nearly tripped over it. From behind an old beech tree trailed a long spiny tail covered in glistening scales. The end of the tail reached right into the middle of the path. From the other side of the tree came little puffs of smoke. There was now no doubt in David's mind. In the middle of Oak Apple Wood there was a real, live, fire-breathing dragon. David gulped and gave a little squeak of fright. He tried to think what the brave knights did in all the fairy tales he knew. Somehow they always seemed to be armed with magic swords and shields. Pulling the hood of his coat even further over his eyes, David picked up a big stick. It would have to do instead of a magic sword. Then he thought that perhaps if he crept past the tree very quietly, the dragon might not notice him. But just as he started to move, he tripped over his shoelace and trod heavily on the scaly tail. There was a loud yelp of pain from behind the tree. Ow! David started to shiver all over, and his teeth began to chatter. He was rooted to the spot with terror. Then above the sound of his own teeth chattering, he heard another sound. Someone else's teeth were chattering too. Whoever it is must have lots of teeth, thought David. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something appear round the edge of the beech tree. It was the end of a thin green and yellow snout, and there were little plumes of smoke rising from its nostrils. David pulled the edges of his hood so tightly together that he could only peep out through a tiny crack. He watched with terrified fascination as more of the snout appeared. The noise of chattering teeth got louder. David gasped in surprise as he realized what that meant. The dragon was just as frightened as he was. All its teeth were chattering, and there must have been at least 100 of them. Then a pair of very frightened orange eyes peeped around the edge of the tree. David opened the crack in his hood a little wider, and for a long time he and the dragon looked at each other nervously. Gradually their teeth stopped chattering, although the dragon was still shivering gently. Very slowly, David pushed back the hood of his coat and smiled shyly at the dragon. It grinned in the best way that a dragon can, and David gave a little giggle. Instead of the great sharp teeth he had been expecting, the dragon had tiny rounded teeth like shiny white pearls. It was still very young and hadn't got its proper teeth yet. Very slowly, so as not to frighten the boy, the young dragon crept out from behind the tree. It had short, stumpy legs with great big feet, and down its back were soft, leathery spines. Tufts of ginger hair grew out of its two huge green ears, which seemed several sizes too big. All over the dragon's body were shiny scales glistening in the colors of the rainbow. A gust of icy wind blew through the trees, and David realized that the poor little dragon was cold. He took off his coat and put it over the creature's back. "Thank you," whispered the dragon. Then it took a deep breath and told David all about itself. It wasn't a very long story. The dragon's name was Jamie, and he had been born very late in the summer, up in the mountains to the north. Normally, when autumn came, all the dragons migrated south, flying to warmer places for the winter. But because Jamie was so small, he didn't have the strength to fly with all the others and had been left behind in the cold. He had flown as far as the wood and run out of energy. A little tear ran down Jamie's scaly cheek as he told David how cold and frightened he had been in the wood. David knew just how the dragon felt. He also knew how to help Jamie. His mother's tiny cottage was only a few minutes away. Inside, the dragon would be cozy and warm. It was the only place to be on a cold, dark night like this. David's mother had a kind heart and loved all the woodland animals. He was sure that she would take pity on the little creature. David led the small, shivering dragon through the wood. As they came in sight of his home, Jamie already looked a great deal happier. David's mother was enchanted with the dragon, who was very polite and well-mannered. She let him curl up in the best chair in front of the fire and busied herself making a pot of rich, creamy soup and special biscuits. The days went by and Jamie lost his bewildered, sad look and began to get stronger. He stayed with David and his mother throughout that long, cold winter, and every night he told them a different story, for dragons have very vivid imaginations and are wonderful storytellers. Spring came and the evenings got lighter. Jamie sat outside the cottage, looking up into the sky. Then one day the dragon saw what he had been waiting for. His family were heading back to the mountains for the summer. Cheerfully he unfurled his wings and with whoops of delight rose gracefully into the sky. Then all the dragons swooped low over the tiny cottage, calling out their thanks to David and his mother before heading off to their summer home in the mountains. For many years afterwards, David watched the skies for the migrating dragons every time that spring arrived, but he never saw any of them again, though sometimes he fancied that he could hear their gentle voices calling hello on the wind that blew down from the mountains. Then he realized just how lucky he was to have met a real live dragon as nice as Jamie had been, for after all, not many people do these days, do they?